First, we at Focus Aphasia are very, very excited to welcome Dr. Arpita Bose, who is an associate professor in the Psychology and Clinical Language Sciences Department at the University of Reading. And today she will be talking about some very interesting work that she has been doing on connected speech in individuals with Alzheimer's disease and aphasia. So I will let Arpita take away. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Manaswita and Breed, for inviting me for this forum. And I can see a lot of people. It's just amazing that so many of you have showed up despite pandemic. So that's very encouraging for the science and the field as well. So I have planned the talk for around 30 minutes, not more than that. This is a very much a work in progress. So I am really looking forward for feedback and your open thoughts, any criticism. I'm very open for you to tell me how things could be changed, because we are still going through the data analysis. And if you are ready, shall I start sharing my slide? Yeah?
Sure.
So okay, so you can just see the main slide, right? One slide. Okay.
Yes.
And in time to time, I will pause if there are questions, because there are methodological concerns I want to discuss with the crowd. So this is a talk on narrative production characteristics in Bengali-English bilinguals with post-stroke aphasia and another group with Alzheimer's disease. Although I am giving the talk, you see series of people here, including Manaswita, who has just joined with me on this project. It's a very complex level of pulling data together from different population and different types of analysis. And this is a really collaborative and joint work with all these people, Yesi, Tina, Bijit. They're all students in Reading. Ronita, Aparna, they're neuropsychologists in Calcutta. Niladri is linguist in Calcutta. Manaswita, as you know, she's in US. So, it's a joint project, and many people who are not as here, Anisha, Moshumi, they helped me with the transcription of very complex data. So thank you all. And this research was supported by British Academic Grant, Felix Scholarship, and in our University Center of Literacy and Multilingualism. So before we go further, it's just, curious, because I see people from across the world, is what is Bengali and where it is spoken. So Bengali is, or sometimes also referred to as Bangla, is spoken, it's the 7th most common language, and it's spoken in the eastern part of India, Bangladesh, and there are big diasporas, Bengali diasporas across the Western world. So, this pink circle is where people usually speak Bengali as their first mother tongue. And the most common estimate right now is there are over 260 million speakers of Bengali worldwide. So that's a huge population. In terms of how Bengali is in contrast to other languages, so this is a beautiful language tree, which I really like to show where English is. So here is English, right? Here are the Germanic, Italic, Romance languages we read about. Most of the publications are in English, in Aphasia or AD German. There are some, of course, research in French. So what we see often is most of our literature is highly in English language and to some extent in other European language, but really there are limited research in non-European languages. And that's quite a shame, because the world is full of beautiful languages, and not to explore those, is a missed opportunity just for theory to understand how languages break down in disorders, but also, there will be the big growth in neurological impairment in lower income and middle income countries. And a lot of this is in Indian languages. And if we don't know how this breakdown is going to be happening, we will miss patients, we miss diagnosis. So I think it's important aspect we have to explore. So with that in background, so that was, I was just making the case why it is interesting to study different languages. So as I was saying, there are a lot of research in neurological disease, the impact of this disease on the language manifestation. So for today's talk, I have focused on telling about the in Bengali, but a lot of these people, these participants are also bilingual. So Bengali is their first language and English is their second language. But I have focused just on the Bengali aspect of it. I can talk about more about the L1, L2 if somebody is interested. So the main motivation for this is to start characterizing in the literature is the nature of these impairments in different type of neurological diseases, aphasia, dementia. And these are important because, we have known that in English, agrammatism is a big area of research, and we know what are agrammatic features, problem with the verb structure, sentence structure. But in Bengali, which is structurally very different from English, we still don't have well-documented research on how these impairments will look in a different language. And with the growth of dementia, and we are always trying to find out what are the linguistic manifestation of these diseases. As linguistic changes has been shown to be early markers in many forms of dementia. PPAs for sure, but even in Alzheimer's disease, and progression of the disease has been documented with different linguistic markers. And again, these are mostly in English studies. There are some French studies, but absolutely this detailed research is not done in Indian languages. So with these goals, this is more of an exploratory study, which I started with my colleagues, and I will present some of the data. And these are more clinical aspects I talked about, but all this have very strong theoretical importance because we want to get to the core of the deficits, So important thing to remember, if you have AD in English, if you have AD in Bengali, you don't become a different disorder, right? You will still remain Alzheimer's disease, but the manifestations are different. And that could help us to ultimately understand where the impairments are across, obviously in English, but other different languages. And I think it's important to start documenting this in a more detailed way. In terms of bilingualism, this is another aspect which is started to show up in, at least in aphasia literature, is the impact of shared structure. If the two languages have shared structures, then are we going to have more impairments on the structure, less impairments? Is it better to treat those shared structures, or what are the implications? So again, when we talk about bilingualism, it's very important to talk about the shared structure and how we can actually take advantage both clinically as well as from theoretical understanding. So with that in mind, here is the state of the literature. Okay, this was from 2011, a review article by Beveridge and Back. What they did is they looked at, across 4 journals, the studies published in aphasia. What they found, and here you see world population, okay? What they found, 5% of world population speaks English as a first language, right? But 62% of published international research is on English. I mean, that's a big imbalance. Now consider it Bengali. We have 3% of world population. This was in 2011, so we are almost 10 years into this. Only 0.08%, research. There are 1 or 2 studies in Bengali. Things have changed now a bit, but this is quite, alarming situation that we are building theories, we are building our understanding based on few users of language, and there are again so many languages in the world which needs to be explored. So this is the state in aphasia. The state is not very encouraging in dementia. So I did only for connected speech in AD. This is a very nice systematic review. And in this review, these are the languages that have been studied, okay? So this is not to say there are not epidemiological studies, there are studies from other countries, but in terms of detailed linguistic studies are very limited. And I'm really determined to change this situation because I think it has consequences for theory as well as for clinics. Now for today's talk, what I thought to present is just the analysis results of how we can characterize production impairments in AD and non-fluent aphasia. For the AD group, we also have task comparisons. So, picture description versus story retelling. And try to see, we can start to see differences across pathologies, okay? Can I just check the time, how I am doing on time? Okay, it's 10 minutes into the thing, right? So the specific research questions we have is to identify the narrative production characteristics on 3 domains: syntax and structure, lexicon and morphology, and task differences also on these 3 domains and across the different pathologies on these 3 domains, okay? Now, it is very well established. There are well-established markers of agrammatic aphasia in English, and they are, the speech is non-fluent, short and fragmentary. You have simplified sentences or limited number of complexities, shorter MLU. In Alzheimer's disease, also you have similar patterns, reduced sentence length, decreased syntactic complexity, but they're less severe than agrammatism. Those fragmentary responses, those completely erroneous grammatical formations are more dominant in agrammatism. In terms of morphology, lexical morphology, they have difficulty with freestanding morphemes, problem with verb and noun inflection, and lot of errors, incorrect morpheme, omission, substitutions. But in Alzheimer's disease, it is not always the case. There are some studies showing that they have problem with morphology, some are not. In terms of lexical level, there are problems with closed class words, function words. There are more nouns in agrammatism, and there is the most significant, difference is difficulty with verb morphology and other functional morphology. In AD, there is, in English at least, it's high proportion of pronouns, low proportion of noun, and that corresponds to their difficulty with lexical access with the concepts, right? The nominal aspects. Often you see increased proportion of verbs in some studies and limited lexical diversity. So what will happen? Will this feature stand up if we test this in Bengali? To do that, I think it's very important to think a little bit about differences in Bengali and English. Here are some differences, but the main thing which I would like to highlight that, Bengali is a different word order and the word order is more fluid, In terms of open class and closed class distribution, again, there are open class words, closed class words, but Bengali has fewer closed class words, and it is primarily because it's a highly inflected language. So the functions of closed class items, what are there in English, are served by inflection in Bengali. Okay, so that's one difference. In terms of morphology, as I said, it's a very rich, extensive, and very systematic morphological system. There are, extensive noun and verb morphology, and also pronoun morphology. Pronoun is like noun, it's inflected, okay? So there are a lot of differences between the two. Now coming to the participants. So anybody doing this type of research will know how hard it is to recruit people and then to characterize them, keep them motivated to complete the study. So I'm not surprised. I will not be unhappy if you said to me you have very few subjects. Yes, in each group we have very few subjects, and in people with aphasia we have 3. This was collected by Abhijit for his PhD thesis, People with Alzheimer's disease, we have a bigger N of 10, and we had healthy controls. They were all sequential bilinguals, Bengali-English, and they lived in Calcutta, which is a bilingual, multilingual city in urban settings, and they use Bengali as their most dominant language. Some of them also used English quite extensively, but they were more dominant in their Bengali. Now, coming to the task is the experimental task. So here was a big difficulty. I was always interested in connected speech, but what task will I do to elicit this type of, long connected speech sample was a question. And in English, it was, Cinderella narrative. If you ask people, they know the story. But that was not the very appropriate stimuli for, in India. The people might know about Cinderella story, but they are not constantly listening to that. Or, culturally, it's not a dominant story. And I wanted to include something which did not have much cultural reference. I wanted to have it something neutral. And then those of you who work with children will know frog story. It's been used extensively with children literature. And I thought that's a good one because it has temporality, spatial words, and there is some literature in the child language. So if I have to actually at some point look into the literature, I have something. So that's why we use frog story. And so that's for narrative task. And again, for the picnic task, a lot of the English literature is cookie theft. And it's really not an appropriate culturally. You don't have those type of kitchens in Calcutta, right? So it was very difficult decision to come up with, but picnic scene was still okay. We felt, there are still actions you want to elicit. And again, there is a color version, and in the pilot phase, we did look into the color and the black and white. At the end, we went with the color version. We have some data from the black and white version as well. And the initial analysis did not yield any big difference. So we are sticking with the colored version, but we can talk about this further. And we elicited both L1 and L2 for people who can do both the languages. And here I will present L1 with Bengali. I don't expect you to know this, but this is just to give you an example is how the transcripts look for frog story. So this is KOL 5. This is not the complete transcript. It's only 1/3. This is somebody with aphasia, Broca's aphasia. This is the full transcript. So you can see the production is so fewer. PO3 AD, again, this is 1/3 of transcript, so you have more productivity in patients with AD if they can produce. Now, again, when the type of analysis we have done 150 words first and later 150 words just to make sure there is strong reliability, and we did not find much difference first versus the next 150 words. So we stuck with the first 150 words because that's what's been recommended in the thing we used, system we used. And here is some sample. So that's a sample for frog story, but without doing linguistic analysis, you can start to see some differences between frog story, which is a more story retelling, versus picture description. And here, you don't have to be a linguist. You can see the sentences are shorter, they are more like listening, and there is a huge literature, at least in aphasia, which show that picture description is quite impoverished in generating what you want to in generating the connected speech. And this is for somebody with mild AD. This is somebody with control. This is just part of the transcripts. How am I doing on time? Okay, I have time. This is the person bilingual AD, not AD, with Broca's aphasia. This is his English and Bengali transcript. I have just typed it in English so that you can understand. And this is somebody with Alzheimer's disease. This is just to give you an idea of how the transcripts might have looked. Now, what method of analysis do we do? And this is another point of discussion in the literature. We could do various methods and, plan, Aphasia Bank gives us very good technique, but it was a Bengali data and I wanted to use something which has been also used in literature. So I went with the QPA, and it looks like in Slager's review that QPA or variant of it has been used in um, uh, across the literature. And other reason why I went with QPA is because it's a very simple system in terms of operating. You have an Excel sheet, you put your variables, and I thought if I needed to add certain variables, I can do that very easily without getting into complicated computer programming. So pragmatic consideration, and also motivation of the literature, we chose the QPA. And as I said, it's still ongoing. And the very bad thing, as you're going through the literature, you read more and you realize you can do this analysis, that analysis. So there are still quite a bit of ongoing analysis we will be doing. But for today, I will present syntactic features, lexical features, and morphological features. And because the subject numbers are so limited, group analysis is not the very good idea, at least for the people with aphasia. So we have used single subject method, Crawford and colleagues method, to really show how the patterns are different, even in limited number of subjects. Okay. So here is how usually the typical data sheet looks like, and you can get a lot of variables, and then you like raw variables, and then you generate the, what is it called, proportional variables. And what I will be presenting are mostly proportional variables, because that's meaningful, if you go across tasks and the number of words are different. So here is some of the variables I chose, and these are again motivated by what's been shown to be useful in terms of describing these people in the literature. And so first, I present the data from aphasia. So just to refresh, these are the main characteristics in English, what has been found. And what I find here is how will you navigate this chart is basically just have an impressionist view. Okay, so gray means they are significantly different, okay, in gray. And we have data from Bengali for 3 patients with non-fluent aphasia. For one of them, we also had cross-linguistic comparison. So first is across most of these 3 of these patients, they had problem with the structural features. Shorter, star means they're significantly shorter to control, group of control. They produce less well-formed sentences, and there were problem with embedding. And that, there are many other variables about embedding we can talk about, but the main idea is they were forming grammatically ill-formed sentences, short sentence, and very simple sentences, okay? One thing you notice that BWA3 has longer sentence in English, but that's a feature of English, because English has so many close class words in a sentence. Usually sentence length for English is longer, okay? In terms of lexical features, again, they had more open class word, real problem with verbs. So lighter gray means they're significantly lower. So in 2 of these aphasics, you had really real problem with verb, also problem with close class words, no pronouns whatsoever, and increased nouns, you see. So BWA2 was less severe, I think. And this is in blue for a purpose. I'll come to that, no usage of pronouns. In terms of morphological features, if you remember, morphological features are the hallmark for agrammatism. There were some problem in noun morphology with people with non-fluent aphasia, but whatsoever no verb inflection problem in Bengali. And that, we can be very excited, oh, they don't have verb inflection problem. They don't have verb inflection problem, but the number of types of inflection they were producing were limited. They were simpler inflection. And it's not surprising, because you cannot really have verbs in Bengali without inflection. To produce a verb, they will be producing inflection. So, and it's a very systematic language, although complex, but it's systematic language. So one of the key things here I have highlighted in dark maroon is, in English language, this BWA3, he had inflectional problem in verb. And because it's not a regular inflected language. So where the language is allowing you to produce those mistakes, they are producing the mistakes, okay? So this is one of the characteristic features, if you are interested in grammatism, is, verb morphology was not impaired. Having said that, they were producing limited number of morphology and limited complexity. So moving to the Alzheimer's disease, again, just remember what has been found in English literature. This is the kind of systematic review, and what they found is, across literature, people are looking at speech production characteristics, syntactic, lexical fluency, various measures depending on what is their research question. But what they see is, across various studies, the second graph, bottom graph, is where you see significant problem, okay, here in these features, which are sentence rate, utterance length, pronouns, again, pronoun, we'll come back to that again, frequency of words, repetition, word finding difficulty, information unit, and efficiency, okay? So these are from the literature. Okay. So what we found, okay, how do I go to the next one? Sorry, this persists, doesn't matter. So first we will talk about the syntactic and structural characteristics. Let me just get rid of this because it's bothering me. Yeah. So across the two tasks, okay, so here all the graphs will be like this. You see the task, frog story and picnic, and solid bars are AD. So across the two tasks, they had shorter sentences, less well-formed sentences, and embedding index was only significantly different in frog story. Important to notice also that the main difference is more heightened in the narrative task, in the frog story task, than the picture description, okay? Now moving to the lexical level, again, just try to have impressionist view, is, these are proportion of open class, closed class word, various types of lexical categories. And so what you see, that frog story is picking up more differences, okay? There is more open class words in AD, lesser closed class words, noun, reduction of noun, which matches with what we understand about AD. This is a proportion with pronoun, is slightly higher. But what characteristic which has been shown in English is difficulty with pronoun. AD don't have difficulty with pronoun. Instead, they are produced overuse of pronoun. They are actually producing lesser pronoun, or in this case, picture description equivalent pronoun. Okay, this is postposition. Postposition is a Bengali feature. It's similar to what is it called? Preposition. So remember that, the pronouns are not significantly different. So either they are less or or equivalent, but never more. And here is a noun inflection lexical morphology. Again, there is no problem whatsoever. But again, there were limited type, variety, and complexity of inflection produced by AD. But whatever inflections they were producing, those were correct. Here is just a summary of these findings. Again, just don't get bogged down by all these signs and symbols. What it is showing that, in picture description, we are not able to pick many differences except for at the sentence structural level, okay? But in English, that's different. In English, in picture description, people have found quite a bit of differences. But frog story is much more richer to elicit some of the things we know that are different. So now going through what we know with the literature, first of all, is syntactic features. Yeah, so shorter sentences, fewer well-formed sentences, these are all in concurrence with English literature, okay? And although Bengali allows more fluid word order, in terms of lexical features, again, there are concurrence with what we know from monolingual English. But the key thing, what we did not find is no overproduction of pronouns in Bengali. And I was thinking, why could this be the case? And people on the team, I kind of convinced them it's because, Bengali, the number of pronouns are higher. In Bengali, there are over 4,000, 5,000 pronouns with the inflected form, but in English, you have 200 or so. So maybe the pronouns are becoming like nouns. They are having difficulty, but it's not the case. My linguist friend actually pointed out that Bengali is a pro-drop language. So you don't need a pronoun all the time. And that allows people to not produce those pronouns. And because it's a very highly inflected verbal system, a lot of the information could be derived from the verbs itself. So, that's something we need to bear in mind when we are researching different languages. And in terms of verb morphology, noun and verb inflection was preserved, but at least they did not have any difficulty with the inflections for tokens they produced. But again, you should not go away thinking that they don't have problem. There is simplification, there are limited variety and complexity. In task comparison, at least in contrast to English literature, picture description is not adequate to pick enough of these differences. Having said that, there are not many systematic studies which have looked into frog story and picnic to come to that. I just found a couple of studies by Sharon Ash, where they actually have looked into frog story and other types of PPA. So, but they again did not go in as much depth in terms of the linguistic analysis. So now trying to see, can we answer the questions we had posed? So in terms of differences, there are, the syntactic structural differences are more widespread in people with aphasia as expected, but AD individuals also had problems with sentence length, complexity, and diversity. In terms of lexical level, in aphasia, major word classes are affected. In AD, it's mostly nouns are affected and no overuse of pronouns. And in morphological level, there are some problem with noun inflection in aphasia, but there is no real difficulty with noun or verb inflection in AD. We are still looking at rate of speech, the CIU type of analysis, fluency, and picture description task is not adequate to identify the linguistic differences. Twice I have said adequately, it should not be the case. Now, so interim summary, I would just say, I think it is important to start looking in world languages and start documenting them. One good thing I feel is that impairment in both disorders are in line with expectations of these disorders, So as I was saying, only because if you have aphasia in other language, it becomes completely a different disorder. It doesn't. It still remains aphasia. And I wanted to highlight this sentence: language impairments depend on how the system can break down, which is determined by the structure of the language systems. And I think this is a very influential thought is, when you are working with different language, you have to understand how those languages are. And I really would recommend people to have very good linguists in your team. Otherwise, we can misinterpret many of the findings. These are, as I was kind of trying to make the case, I think in long term, these are helpful in developing markers of linguistic impairments, progression of disease, diagnostic markers for, different types of dementia. And I think it's just fun to work with different languages and understand how things break down and what happens. I want to say real sincere thanks to all our participants, who had given so much of their time, funding agencies, and many colleagues, and of course, all the people who have contributed significantly to this project.